Thank you. Before we begin, I was wondering how many artists we have in the room. Could you raise your hand if you are an artist? Oh, wonderful. I've got some, I love it. You know, it takes a little courage to admit that you're an artist, right? It feels a little vulnerable. It's interesting, though, for young children, if I asked my kindergartners the same question, they would unanimously joyfully exclaim that they were all artists, right? Pablo Picasso famously said, every child is an artist, right? And he's not wrong. Their innate ability to create and imagine without restraint is enviable. But where does that leave us, the adults, right? Are children the exception? When does this artistic ability stop and why, right? I've spent a good part of my life thinking about creativity and what it means to be an artist. I think maybe it goes back to when I was in elementary school. I went to an elementary school that didn't have an art program. And let's see, there I am, 1978, right? I was fortunate, though, because I had one classroom teacher who, on the rare occasion, would lead us in a directed drawing. And these were my favorite days. On this particular day, we were learning how to draw a person ice skating. And normally, I would follow along carefully, step by step, because at the end of class, my teacher would walk down the aisles of the classroom, and there were 31 students in my class, and she would look for the best example to show up. And mine had never been chosen. So I don't know what came over me on this particular day, because I decided not to follow her directions. I had a perfectly good reason. The scarf she had drawn was way too short and stiff, right? It was an ice skater, after all, so I decided it needed to be long and flowy, so I added a few extra curves and some fringe for effect. I was so proud of my drawing. I can remember sitting up nice and tall, just willing her to stop at my desk. And she did. But instead of praise, she said, next time, follow the directions, right? On this day, I learned that there was a right and a wrong way to create art, and that good art had to look a certain way. Do you know, it took me my lifetime to unlearn that, right? And in some ways, I'm still trying to unlearn that. So, and I'm still trying to unlearn that. For some of our students, that would have been the line. That's when they would have decided, I'm not an artist. Why bother trying? Some of you who didn't raise your hands at some point in your life may have said the same thing. Or you might have heard some version of this in your classrooms. It might not be, I'm not an artist, but it could be, I'm not a mathematician or a scientist, right? Or an athlete or a musician, whatever your content area, right? That's the fear. It's not apathy, it's the resignation, right? You know, it's interesting because third grade studies point to third grade as a turning point for students, right? This is when students start to recognize who's good at something and who's not, right? And so I thought it would be interesting to ask my third graders, and I also included my fourth graders, are you an artist, and what does it mean to be an artist, right? And I was really expecting some definitive yeses and nos, and hopefully more yeses than nos, right? That they would all say, yes, we are artists. But what I learned was interesting. Between third and fourth grade, the number of students who answered, I don't know, doubled. So that by fourth grade, 50% of my students didn't know if they were artists. 50%, right? And the reason can be found in the answer to what does it mean to be an artist. Artists can draw really good, and you can make things look real, right? Ability came first, right? And ability is important, right? But it's not the most important thing, right? I wanted my students to know that regardless of perceived ability, that they were the artists, right? That their ideas matter, that creativity lives within all of them, right? There are limitless ways of being creative. So you might think that I should double down on teaching technique, right? Teaching students the elements of art. Right? I decided to look at my students who didn't know that they were artists, right? And I decided to focus on what does it mean to be an artist, right? And even though I wasn't creating cookie cutter art projects like my elementary teacher, my students' work looked curiously very similar, right? You could see that I was making most of the artistic decisions, right? You could see which students were good at following my directions, right? Sound familiar, right? And so I decided that I needed to take a risk, right? And when we take risks, right, as educators, our students learn to take risks, right? I had to trust their ideas. I had to follow their interests, and I had to lift up their voices, right? So teaching for artistic behavior allows me to do that, right? It allows me to embed my standards while showing my students the importance of making mistakes, of persevering, of giving and receiving feedback, right? Choice and voice. Oh, sorry, I'm going to back up there. All right. But what I realized is that I can't do it alone, right? That we collectively need to change what it means to be creative, right? What it means to be an artist. You know, what's heartbreaking is when a teacher or a parent will come up to me and they'll say, I can't believe, like, you're so artistic. I am not artistic. I don't have an artistic bone in my body, right? I couldn't even draw a straight line. What's worse is when someone will come up to me and they'll shyly admit that they are creative, that they like to create in some way, but they'll quickly follow it with, I would never call myself an artist. I just do it for fun, right? Why not? Why not call yourself an artist? Oh, I went back too far. There you go. Instead of doubling down, right, on teaching technique, I decided that I need to show my students that creativity is intertwined across the curriculum in your subject areas. If you model what it means to be an artist in your content area, right, we all know that creativity can be found in math and science, right? It can be found in history. So we need imagination and math to land on Mars, right? We need divergent thinking and science to cure cancer, right? We need history and defiance to start a movement, right? These are all artistic traits. If you think back to an impactful learning experience from your school days, right? Mine was in 8th grade math. This is Mr. McGee, right? And this is unusual because up until 8th grade, I used to cry over math homework pretty much every night. And Mr. McGee challenged us to design and furnish a house while staying within a budget. And we had to figure out the cost per square foot depending on the building materials that we chose. And I remember just throwing myself into this project, right? It was the first time that I understood the practical application for math and how it pertained to me, right? We all have stories of teachers like Mr. McGee and projects that stretched us creatively, right? My kindergartners and first graders wrote a mantra, and we say it at the beginning of every class to remind us that creativity requires continued acts of courage. And if you find yourself losing courage, I want you to remember my kindergartners. Sorry, I'm gonna move over here. You are all artists, right? Say it with me. I am an artist, right? Be willing to make mistakes, right? Be kind to yourself. Your artistry is in the way that you empower, inspire, and impact your students. Remember that quote that I started with, every child is an artist? Well, there's a second line to that quote, and it's every child is an artist. The problem is remaining an artist once you grow up. Remember that you are the artistic geniuses of your classrooms, right? And that possibility is inherent in every creative act. So give your students the gift of possibility. And be brave. Maybe add a few extra curves and some fringe. Thank you. Thank you.